This is Dr. Nikki Weiner from the Rising Workplace, and I'm here to speak with everyone today on the topic of WFH, WTF Just Happened. And first of all, I just want to say I hope that you can find a little humor in my title, and maybe this was the driving force for you to sign up for this very strange talk. But if there's anything that I learned in my years working as a healthcare professional, it's that sometimes humor is a really great strategy in a difficult or trying situation, much like a global pandemic. And humor is also a great strategy to connect with one another. So on that note, I want to thank you for showing up today and connecting with me. And I'd like to invite you to connect with me after this talk by visiting our website or following us on social media. I also want to say a huge thank you to Contour Design, who offered to host me for this presentation. We've had a lot of interesting and fun conversations leading up to this, and it is a real pleasure to be here today. This talk focused on looking back, now that we're basically a full year in, what just happened, looking at some data, some trends, how can we tie this together to become effective virtual ergonomic specialists in this very strange time. I like to think of it as the wild side of ergonomics, working from home. So just a little bit about myself and my background. I'm the president and lead ergonomic specialist of the Rising Workplace. And before I transitioned into working in ergonomics, I worked in physical rehabilitation for 10 years. And that really informed my practice in ergonomics, understanding such key issues as chronic pain, musculoskeletal disorders, functional tolerance, environmental modification, and human behavior. And now in this, working in ergonomics during a pandemic, it's really allowed me to flex some of these creative occupational therapist muscles that I gained working in physical rehabilitation. And I'm sure I have some other OTs on the line here with me today. And you guys know kind of how scrappy we can be and how working from home is kind of scrappy too. So there's an added benefit of being able to think creatively and resourcefully in this space. So I'm a licensed and registered occupational therapist and an ergonomic specialist, and I oversee an awesome network of ergonomic specialists who provide services nationwide, even globally. Our headquarters is located in a funky little town called Asheville, North Carolina, nestled in the Blue Ridge Mountains. And when I'm not sitting in front of my computer screen, I am out exploring and hiking in our beautiful area. So here are our objectives today. First, I want to give you some background, how I think about ergonomics and how I explain ergonomics to others. And then we're going to look at some data. We're going to look at some anonymous survey data that I've gathered over the course of the pandemic. And really, what I've realized is as I'm reading more and more about what's coming out, it's really validating a lot of information that we're starting to hear about the #1 trends and issues and discomforts related to working from home. And then we're going to look at 6 identified work from home problems that I just tend to see over and over again tying in that data to think about root cause, and then solutions. So these crafty solutions when budget is an issue, a lot of other barriers, certainly working from home that we'll talk about, but how to address these issues when we're not working from a catalog, so to speak. We have to kind of meet our clients where they're at. And then towards the end, I'm going to give you some tips for successful work from home ergonomic services, both at the client level and at the company level. And again, this requires a certain degree of flexibility and meeting the client or the person where they're at. I'll leave you with a little good news and a bit of a spoiler, but the good news is we can still provide effective services in this space. Your outcomes can be really strong if you pay attention to the whole picture and you kind of shift your thinking a little bit away from a biomechanical approach and more viewing all of these challenging factors that we are beginning to learn more and more through data as the pandemic goes on. And we'll have time for Q&A at the end. So go ahead and put your questions in the chat box as you think about them, and I will take them at the end. So I want to introduce a practice model that would be very familiar to any other occupational therapists here with me today, but this is a guiding light, so to speak. This is the way that I have always thought about ergonomics, but also it, I think, is even more essential working from home because a lot of these factors have been piled on in an extreme. This is called the PEOP model, performance, or it's person, occupation, environment, and performance. And this model comes from Christensen, Baum, and Law. And basically what this means is that we can perform well in the space of ergonomics with our actual work when we are matched well to our environment and our job demands. And this makes sense to most of us who work in this space, but it's really important to think about how these factors overlap and the different layers of complication here in the context of the pandemic. So we look at the person first. We're seeing things like poor working postures. Of course, now in the dark days of the pandemic, many locations are under a couple feet of snow right now. We're getting less movement and exercise, and I've been seeing the numbers on this. It's really significant. And I think we're all kind of feeling trapped in a space where we can't, obviously go out and go to the gym like we could. We can't necessarily go out and get exercise outdoors if the weather isn't good. It's a lot of factors there. And then certainly stress. Mental health, increases in depression and anxiety, pandemic-induced insomnia. These are all trends that we're seeing on that person level. And then to talk about occupation. So literally the job demands here. And this is how working at home for many people is a new way of work that involves extreme technology reliance. And I think about here older populations who maybe aren't as adept at the technology, and how shifting to that on top of the fact that that population is more prone to musculoskeletal disorders, this can be a real contributor here. Just the long hours spent at the screen in order to do our work in a setting where otherwise, if we were in the office, we would at minimum be getting up, going to the break room occasionally, moving away from the desk for in-person meetings, etc. And then the environment is huge. And we'll talk more at length about environmental challenges, but this is something really cannot ignore. Our physical workspaces, the fact that we're dealing with a lot of distractions, other people in the home, maybe competing for office space, small spaces, certainly in more urban areas, not having the right equipment. And these factors all play into each other. You can think about how the person interacts with the environment. The environment causes the person to work in these poor working postures many times. The extreme technology reliance under the job demands can certainly contribute to poor sleep because we're not, we're getting too much blue light exposure, for example. But knowing that if we can take a look at all of these circles and the way that they interact and match them up well, then we will perform better at our work. And synonymous with performance is working in a state where you're injury-free. Because as you know, if you're uncomfortable, if you're in pain, you're not going to perform at your peak. Here's another model to think about. When I was kind of, again, in that processing state of what has happened so far in this work from home era, and it came to mind the stages of grief. And I thought, when people come to me, or companies, they all seem to be at a different phase and stage. And I can give examples of each one. So I've kind of rehashed this model, and I hope you'll be entertained with my version of it, the work from home stages. It started with denial. You guys remember this. This was March. This was back when, it's no more serious than the flu. This will be over soon, not a big deal. Like, I don't know why the news is so much hype about this, right? So remember being in the denial stage. I think then quickly we moved into maybe not the anger stage, let's call it confusion. So this was the scramble. This was April, May, and companies and individuals were trying to figure out what to do now. Okay, this is happening. Somebody please, help me figure this out. And certainly, I think in April was when I started to have companies reaching out to do webinars with me. People were asking for help. But as the pandemic went on, you start off with good intentions and everything, but many companies and people shifted into that bargaining stage. It's, seeing that this is becoming a long-term issue, cutting some corners, sending employees home with little supports, just working off a laptop, it'll be fine, no big deal. And maybe some companies had to make really tough decisions at this stage. It was either not lay anyone off or provide equipment stipends. I mean, those are tough bargains to strike. And there's a lot of kind of figuring out the process at this stage. And then as a consequence of some bargaining, maybe not depression, but pain. This is when I'll reference an earlier talk that I watched on the Contour Design webinar series that was termed the work from home tsunami. So that's when this came down, and that's when we started to see a lot of people reaching out because they were in significant pain. They couldn't work, their work was limited, they weren't performing well because of the pain as a result of a poor setup working from home and all the other layers that we just spoke about in the last slide. Luckily now, we're seeing more and more people and companies shift towards the acceptance stage. This is, I'm seeing this by individuals that are starting to invest in a better home office. They're seeing this as a more permanent situation. Companies, they're starting to write up some work from home policy that includes ergonomics. They are starting to create supports for their team. And it's really nice to be working at this stage with clients and individuals because you can really help them to make meaningful changes at this point. And a lot of companies I'm working with, they finally have a plan. They're going all remote or coming up with a flexible work plan. I know many of us don't know what the future holds as far as going back to the office, but they're starting to at least think ahead about this and think about their options, accepting the fact that this is happening and we have to do something about it. If you're like me and you did some virtual assessments over the course of the pandemic, you may have seen some very frightening things, very frightening. I'm not sure what stage this is. It could be confusion, it could be bargaining, but some of the pictures that were brought to my attention pre-assessment, I just felt very discouraged by the work from home situation. I mean, there's a dresser, okay, there's not a chair, there's not a desk, there's an external mouse and keyboard, that's good. You just imagine the person who's not in this picture, but you imagine what the person looks like working in this space and how they can actually perform their job duties using a setup like this. And I'll show you a few more pictures. This one on the left. This was one I was working on with another consultant, and we were just looking at it and thinking, okay, what's going on here? We had to kind of solve the puzzle. We've got looks like some decent equipment, but I couldn't quite figure it out. This person is working from a tent. And you see those situations, people setting up pods in their backyard so that they can get away and have some peace and quiet. I think, in all fairness, this person worked in land preservation, but I mean, this is a huge consideration. You can't bring in large, heavy equipment in this space. And then, of course, we've probably seen a lot of similar scenarios to the one here, the kitchen counter. It's just, the intentions are good, trying to get some movement through standing, trying to pay attention to the height of the monitor by raising it up, but we know what the body does if it was lined up with this, and it would be a lot of overreaching of the arms and not a good all day long work setup, as much as the intentions behind it might be very good. Okay, so let's look at some of this survey data. And I know it might be hard for some of you to see on your screen, so I'll walk you through it. And these are locations of discomfort. So the first represents a group of 109 typical workforce. So this could be anyone, actually any location globally. They filled out a self-assessment tool. So it wasn't somebody who reached out for an advanced assessment. This is just kind of a general population. And you can see the #1 discomforts are neck, followed by lower back, upper back, and then eyes. Um, Almost 60% of people are reporting neck pain, and lower back is not far behind. So that is really significant for a population that you can assume is pretty typical. If you're looking at the other side here, these are people that reached out for an advanced assessment. So I think about this group as being more likely to have reported be in the stage of having a musculoskeletal disorder. And I think that's evidenced by, in this group, you're seeing more of what we might call the mousing syndrome. You're seeing more dominant shoulder or arm pain, dominant wrist pain than we do in the typical population. And that kind of made sense to me, is that, yeah, these people might be under medical surveillance a little bit more because they have this kind of specific body issue, whereas the people that are working from home, they're just kind of accepting the fact that they're having very significant neck and lower back pain, just a consequence of working, I suppose. And look here, so this is a 0 to 10 work from home discomfort scale. This is that typical work from home population. And you'll see that, well, nobody reported 0 discomfort. So it gets back to that idea of we're just kind of accepting this as a consequence of our work. And many of us are in the high range categories, the 5, 6, 7s, and 8s. I think this is really significant. And knowing that we are spending many more hours in front of a screen, whether it's for work or socializing. I mean, many of us, because we're not connecting with our loved ones in person, we're also using our screens and our devices to socialize and for leisure, because again, in these dark days of the pandemic, many of us are spending a lot of times indoors, thus in front of a computer. So you can see that it seems that if you go to the office for 8 hours a day, you might be working on the computer. What do you think? 6 or 7 hours of a day. At home, there's just a whole nother component of screen use and a huge exacerbation in this space. So let's talk a little bit more about the work from home situation. A lot of factors to consider. Environmental factors, huge. Things like sharing small spaces, or sharing spaces in general. You might be competing with a spouse or partner for an office space. You might have children at home. Certainly, we know kind of what the research says about what noise and distraction does to our work. They've done a lot of studies with nurses that work in an ICU. They call it alarm fatigue. So when your job involves hearing a lot of unpredictable sound, like in the case of the nurses, it's the ventilators, the call bells, the people talking, this creates this increase of perceived mental exhaustion, and also increases our errors and gives us the feeling of being burnt out. So that issue alone, as we can imagine, has been a big driving force in the work from home struggle. In addition to things like technology and compatibility issues, I'll give you a short example of that one, and I'm sure that you have come across some similar scenarios, but I worked with a young man here locally who's in high school, and he designed a foam board laptop stand. It was brilliant. And he introduced it to his school. And I partnered with a group who was going to donate the external mouse and keyboards to the school. We were so excited about this. All the kids made their laptop stands. We were getting ready to push the donation through, and we realized the school issued laptops have one USB port. Now, of course, we could bring in a splitter, that kind of thing, but it adds a layer of complication here. It would just be a whole lot easier if our technology was set up to encourage a more ergonomic working position. A huge factor here is limited financial resources. The person or the company. Again, many companies were faced to make pretty difficult decisions that didn't allow a lot of support for employees, at least financial support, working from home. And then aesthetics over function. We're going to get into this a little bit later, but this is bigger than I thought it would be working from home, especially in people that are working in small apartments. you have to, I guess, keep some type of a style standard in your own home that in some cases, it's not the best choice for working comfort. So it's choosing products that, especially when it comes to desks and chairs, that fit in the space aesthetically even. Of course, decreased movement and exercise. We talked about this as a biggie, and we're starting to see more data that tells us that this is something that is really significantly decreased. And as we know, this is one of our greatest protectors against developing musculoskeletal disorders. We have to be able to get up and move and exercise as a protective measure for our bodies. And then baseline muscle tension and stress. I read a great book recently called Tech Stress. Dr. Eric Pepper was one of the authors there. And I thought they did a really great job about kind of this understated side of ergonomics, addressing baseline muscle tension and stress. So if our muscles are kind of just existing in this baseline tense state, that's another layer of exacerbation and can really increase our likelihood of becoming more uncomfortable in our workspace. So best advice there is to guide people in finding simple ways to relax your whole body throughout the workday, whatever that means for you. If it's breathing exercises, meditation, yoga, getting outside, getting some sunshine, going on a walk, this is a huge factor that I think, again, is a little bit understated. On that note, too, the psychosocial factors, things like creating boundaries that can be so difficult when we're basically on top of our work all day long when our work is in our home. So I always encourage my clients to follow some simple self-care routine in the morning before you invite your work in, because if you roll out of bed, check that email, you get an email that you weren't really mentally prepared to receive, and it can kind of set the tone for the whole day. So I'm all about going through some short routine that allows you to mentally prepare, wake up, get yourself ready for the workday, and then at the end of the day, if we can find a time to turn it off an hour before bedtime or more, I think that's a really, it's a really mindful way to address the potential psychosocial factors and just the enmeshment of work and home that exists right now. So let's get into the trends, the observations that if you are working in ergonomics, you have seen this and they've been pointed out again and again, but let's tie this into the data and also think about easy solutions working from home. So the first, and I do think about this as the #1 problem, it's the idea of prolonged all day long laptop use. I think about a laptop that they're designed for mobile working. They were designed for working on the go in the cafe, at the hotel. They really are not the right tool to set up for an 8 to 10 hour workday. And we know that this causes discomfort because you cannot achieve a neutral position using a laptop as demonstrated here. So the solution, as we know, is separating out. It's using a laptop stand or a stack of books, using an external mouse and keyboard, and especially doing this when you're buckling down for that full day of work. Contour Design has done a great job of adapting by creating a kit that's more flexible. Again, the person will be more successful at doing this if it's something that's very easy to set up, something that's portable, something that's lightweight, doesn't take up a whole lot of space. And so think about having a kit, much like Contour Design has now released with their roller mouse, that just makes it easier for the individual, and then they'll be more likely to use it. So related to that problem #1, the all day long laptop working, I thought this was super interesting. So I looked back at people who reported neck discomfort at any level, and I was curious. So what percentage of those primarily are working off of a laptop in that just normal, typical workforce group? And it was kind of astounding, 75%. It's astounding, but also at the same time, it's not surprising. 75% are primary laptop users without an external mouse and keyboard. And so there we go, folks. The proof is there. Laptops cause neck pain, right? We knew this, but this is some pretty strong data and good to educate others with in the importance of separating out with an external mouse and keyboard. There's no substitution for that. We can hack a lot of other things. We can hack a monitor riser with a stack of books. We can hack a lumbar support with a rolled towel, a footrest with a sturdy box. That external mouse and keyboard, there really is not a substitution for that. In fact, that's something that I tell my clients before I do a webinar for them. Say, look, I'm going to say that it's a necessity that you use an external mouse and keyboard if you use a laptop. Just get ready for that. I'm not, I'm going to try not to create a stir, everybody asking for them, but at minimum, you really need to supply them or have them as an option for your employees. Okay, let's look at trend number 2, problem number 2. We're seeing a lot of this working from dining chairs, and you can see the posture in this first picture. Again, the person has pretty good intentions. They're thinking about their posture. We wonder how long that would last before the back muscles start to fatigue and you start to slump forward. Also, the main issue here is going to be overreaching. The fact that the arms are persistently away from the body, creating this sustained muscle contraction over time, it's going to create an inflammatory response. And so the main issue here is, many times lack of back support, but the idea of overreaching and how you'll never, sitting in a typical dining chair, you'll never really be high enough in relation to your mouse and keyboard. So the solution here, if we're going to be crafty, it will be adding in some lumbar support, adding in a pillow or a cushion, even a folded blanket to sit you higher, using that external mouse and keyboard. Hey, it's not perfect, but it's going to be a much more comfortable alternative if your workspace looks like the first picture here. Another thing that I frequently suggest to people who are not at all considering replacing their chair, maybe they're working at their dining table and they need to be able to, move the computer when it's mealtime, a clamp on keyboard tray. And maybe that's one benefit of the pandemic, is that you've seen more of these devices come out that don't require power drills. As soon as you start, if there's a power drill involved, I'm not going to be able to do it. Let's just be honest. Many people can, but things that clamp on and off, like a keyboard tray or monitor arms that can clamp onto the desk and then even be removed at mealtime, this is huge. And so pointing people in the direction of devices like this can really be a lifesaver, bringing the work surface down and the arms to a more comfortable level. Also a fan of maybe using a lap desk if that can work for some people, or just, trying alternatives like this, especially if a big, equipment purchase is not in the books. You have to be able to help the client kind of where they're at, make the best use of what they have, with an emphasis on neutral postures and a lot of movement strategies. So here's a little more information about people working from dining chairs. You can see that it has a significant amount of people who describe their primary workspace as not having a desk and chair. And even within that space of that group, the desk and chair scenario doesn't necessarily mean that it's a height adjustable chair. So, a pretty big chunk of us working from home, you can assume are not going to be able to achieve a neutral posture position as a consequence of not having available to them an adjustable chair. So this is really telling about that scenario. This first graph here, I've already showed you this one. This is the 0 to 10 discomfort across the typical workforce. Now let's look at the 0 to 10 discomfort across people who reported that their primary workspace was a table and chair. And we can assume this is like a kitchen or a dining table or chair that was not adjustable. It's really high. We see most people in the 6, 7, 8 range, and it's alarming. We need to make a change about this because it's contributing to a lot of significant discomfort, as is the laptop use. And when I say a change, it doesn't have to be a drastic change. It can be a creative and resourceful or strategic approach to feeling better at work. Oh my gosh. Okay, guys. Can we talk about the dreaded desk drawer? And does anybody want to band together with me on reaching out to the right person to get these not as trendy. So unless you have like an incredibly long torso and incredibly short humeruses, this is going to be a very poor fit for most people. And it's like the #1 desk that I'm seeing people buy that live in these very, trendy, stylish apartments. It's always going to be paired with a chair that has, poor lumbar support. It may have fixed armrests. It's definitely going to have a furry or feathery pillow on the back. So this is the trend we're seeing all the time, right? We see it in the magazines, on, Instagram, Pinterest, and let's face it, overreaching is a real issue, and you're especially mostly going to see, honestly, women using these desks. And so we can assume that somebody who is more petite might have an even more greater challenge working with this type of desk. So I'm not really sure what to do about this, because you can't install a keyboard tray. It can be tricky to work on a lap desk in this scenario where you're up against the desk. If you can remove the drawer, that has been one of the better strategies. So many desks, you can just remove the drawer and then sit under it, and then it loses its aesthetic appeal. But if you see that middle picture, there's a metal bar there. There's no chance to sit high enough in relation to the desk. So these are really not great for all day long working tools. Again, if it was a home office where you were working a few hours here and there, kind of typical to what a home office used to be, working a little bit on the weekends, it's fine. But as soon as this turns into our all day long working tool, it can create a real problem. And I've seen this as a real problem for a lot of my clients. So again, you guys brainstorm with me about what we can do about this. It's kind of like skinny jeans. Those are really trendy for a while, but now I've heard that skinny jeans are no longer in style anymore. That gives me hope about these desks. Is this that kind of trend that it really wasn't good for a lot of people? It caused problems with a lot of people, and we want to see them go away. Okay, problem 4, couch and bed working. So I'll say here that there is a benefit to having a flexible workspace and a flexible routine, and it is a necessity. So we need to have a flexible working plan that involves workspaces that are outside of the desk and chair that you might have at home. We can do better with attention to neutral posture and ergonomics when we have to work in these spaces. I say when at all possible not to work from the bed, because that's is more about crossing that boundary between home life and work life, and rest and work and that kind of thing. But when you're working from the couch, I will say, especially if you have a home desk setup that's subpar, there's going to be a benefit to changing up your body position. You just have to think about how to do that better. And certainly there's some psychology about flexible workspaces. There's a great book called The Best Place to Work, and it walks through the psychology of different body positions and what they're good for. One being, seated in a comfortable couch or armchair, we're better at opening up, sharing with others. That's why when you go to therapy, you don't stand up there with the counselor. And then standing is great for generating ideas. To me, as soon as you're doing anything intensive, mousing, typing, interacting with the computer on an intensive level, you're going to be best suited at a desk and chair where you're well supported. But we do have to be flexible. If we can pay a little attention to our body position, add in some lumbar support, make sure our feet are supported. I'm a fan of a lap desk for couch working, but you have to make sure that it's long enough to accommodate a mouse. And so if you look at the typical dimensions of a lap desk, many of them start at like 17, 18 inches. Really, you want to go for one that's 20 or 21 so that you have plenty of space to work with a mouse. And then you're getting that added benefit of not having your shoulder internally rotated while you're mousing, using all that fine motor movement of the wrist and the hand, using the trackpad. So at least your arm and your shoulder is going to be more relaxed. It's going to promote you to have better back support if you're working at that level, as opposed to trying to lean over, with the laptop on the coffee table or something like that. We have to put a limit on this because we know it's not still the best position. So the strategy there would be not doing this for more than 30, 45-minute intervals, not letting it be your all day long working position, and frequently micro braking. So knowing that the neck is going to be the most at risk, take some breaks looking up at the ceiling every so often to relieve the stress on the neck, and trying to tilt the screen back at a level where you can use your eyes more than your neck when you're viewing. Okay, here's another trend, trying to sit without a sit-stand desk. And Exhibit A here, really great intentions again. She's got her mind focused on raising up the screen to eye level. Sometimes if we can work outside and get a little natural sunlight, that might even be more important every now and again than having perfect ergonomics. But if we could just get one more cardboard box in that picture and an external mouse and keyboard, she would be all set and in a very comfortable position. So just reminding that our clients that we need to think about the work surface as elbow level. We can do this creatively using tools around the house. I've seen pictures of folks using ironing boards, but just remembering that you know, it's a good strategy to have a flexible working plan, but think that through what that's going to look like so that your body is more comfortable at the end of the day. Okay, so that number 4 discomfort area was eyes. And even, I mean, my daughter was even saying today how tired she was of Zoom, and we're hearing this as Zoom fatigue. And you know the feeling. It's the feeling behind the eyes when you have been in front of that screen for too long. And I think we're just trying everything we can to avoid this, and that means that a lot of people are buying those blue light glasses, which, you know, really good at filtering blue light, especially when we need to pay attention to that after hours. But you know, the greatest source of blue light is the sun. So as long as we are, you know, that might help us in the evening, things like obviously tuning our circadian rhythm, helping with our sleep cycle, but really we need to focus on educating people that you have to take breaks away from the screen for this problem to be better. We have to let our eye muscles relax by looking at things farther away, looking at the horizon. Your body's going to be in a more relaxed state. Your eyes are going to be more relaxed. We need to practice doing this frequently. The back school calls this the 20-20-20 rule, looking at an object 20 feet away every 20 minutes for 20 seconds. Again, good for our whole body. It's our more relaxed state, essential to combat this idea of screen fatigue, and making sure that your clients know that this is not a consequence of blue light. This is a consequence of viewing distance. And I'm here to prove that. So if we look at the people that reported eye discomfort, we know they're not getting away from the screen. They're not getting up and moving and looking at things farther away. So almost 66% of these folks are not taking adequate movement breaks. So, you know, that movement break, it's going to help us turn on our muscles that release those molecules that bring down inflammation. It's also going to help our eyes. It's also going to help relax our eyes and combat the screen fatigue that all of us are dealing with. Okay, so those were my top 6 observations and kind of the data behind that, and tried to provide some practical tips that you might be able to help your clients out with. But let's talk about work from home programs and how to approach that when you're working with companies. My first tip is to, well, come up with a work from home policy that includes some standard for ergonomics, something that includes base education for everyone and also reactive measures. And whether it's sourcing equipment from the office or coming up with an approved list that's accessible from a cost perspective, it's getting all those supports in place so that employers have a plan to address ergonomics working from home. My second tip is making sure that when you're in the planning phase of these programs, make sure that you get appropriate departments involved. And this is kind of different than what it was working pre-pandemic, because most of the time you're dealing with human resources. Well, when you're working more on the virtual level, you want to make sure to get IT involved. So if you're making product recommendations, you want to make sure that you're compatible with the devices that they use, and they don't have any extreme opinions or loyalty to certain product brands and that type of thing, and making sure that the devices you recommend for your clients fit with their technology. Also facilities. So let's take an inventory about what's just sitting in the office unused, and how are we going to handle procurement? Is this something that the company is going to take ownership of? Or I find that most companies prefer to use something like a stipend and have the employee take ownership of work from home tools and devices, especially companies that are starting to go fully or part-time remote. Also, human resources, of course, and legal. You want to make sure that you're following whatever regulations, especially for global companies, DSE requirements, Cal OSHA. You want to make sure that you're paying attention to all of these when you're offering virtual programs that cover large territories. Proactive and reactive measures in place. So everyone could benefit from some type of base education in setting up their workspace better from home, making best use of what they have, and then guiding them on what to do when an employee presents to them who has discomfort, and presenting an opportunity and making it easy for the employee to approach their employer with that information. I think sometimes when employees are working from home, the employer doesn't really know what's going on. You know, they're not having the same type of contact. They're not walking around the office and seeing that person with their hand on their back, the person pacing around the office because they're so clearly visibly uncomfortable. So making sure you have some type of system where the employee can reach out without any barriers. Self-paced or on-demand resources. So I've done almost 70 live company webinars since the start of the pandemic. And I appreciate anytime anyone can join me for a live webinar. Of course, that's great. There's that interactive component. It's the Q&A. But every single time, I absolutely welcome the company to record and keep the webinar as a resource, because you don't know how far reaching that can go. Certainly, people can be out because they had COVID. They might be taking care of children that day. They could be dealing with a difficult circumstance, and you want to make sure that everyone has access to that information with the intent of helping as many people as possible. And then also just trying to practice our own guidance is that, you know, if somebody needs a break from the screen at that moment, you know, let them go at their own pace with the learning. I think that's a very positive thing in this space. Equipment lists and guides geared for work from home. So this is interesting. You know, you have to get an understanding about a couple different things before you go into creating an equipment list and guide for a company. You need to really understand the good and the bad of what's out there. I find that most companies want products that are going to be in stock and quick ship and reliable. They don't want to deal with, obviously, products that don't get great reviews, that tend to break. So you want to go with your trusted resources on that. But also you need to keep cost in mind and present options for, you know, in the case of an employee having a stipend, they have to negotiate and figure out how they're going to use that. And they may not be able to choose, you know, the best keyboard on the market because they've decided to invest more in the chair. So helping employees make really informed decisions through guides that are more flexible and present a wide range of vendors and brands that represent quality at the best price point. And then, as we know, that one of the biggest evidence-based practices behind ergonomics programs is employee engagement. So when I launch a program, usually it starts with a webinar and I take a survey at the end, and I want to hear from them. I want to hear, obviously, how the webinar went, but I also want to know, how else can your company support you? You know, what matters to you the most in this process? So definitely finding some way to hear from your employees and get them engaged in the program is the key to success. So here's an example of some guide that I developed for a company. It's just different than any other type of guide you would typically see, right? It's a decision tree because you're helping make You're helping these employees make informed decisions. It's not that catalog where, you know, the employer has a relationship with a certain vendor, you just pick the chair and then you're good to go. You know the chair is going to be great. In the work from home space, you got a variety of budgets. So I have a tree for every different, you know, price point. One for under $200, one for the 200 to 500, and the one for the over the 500. I eliminated the names of the chairs here, but you can see the considerations. You think about the way that the person might be thinking in making a chair decision and eliminating any possibility for them to make a bad choice, like purchasing something with fixed armrests, or, you know, is this maybe a good time to talk about executive chairs? You know, is keeping those off the list. I think, first of all, this is maybe something we need to band together about also, is the fact that they're called executive chairs and they very traditionally are suited to bigger and taller people. I think that eliminates a large population of women who might be executives. And also, I think people might make this chair decision because of the name. You know, it kind of ropes them in, when in fact, if you want a chair of that style, you might be better suited for something along the lines of a gaming chair that has that kind of plush, upholstered, high back feel. You know, maybe not everybody wants to be associated with being a quote unquote gamer. So I feel like that's another thing that we need to address in this market. But again, helping the employees make the best decisions with a wide range of product and brands that you know and trust. So obviously positive reviews, good customer service, quick ship options, and then you won't have this come back to you as an ergonomic specialist to hear that this product is not doing its job. It broke in 30 days. So of course we know the folks at Contour Design have a full range of flexible options that would be suited for working from home, and that we can feel confident about including such items on our work from home lists. Just a little advice here about successful one-on-one assessments, working with the individual. The first piece is gathering as much meaningful information prior to signing on with the individual virtually. We want to take a thorough intake questionnaire, have the individual send pictures, many different angles of them working in the workspace, so you can fully assess the situation in the absence of being there in person. You get on the call with them, you find there's often a limitation about, you know, being able to view actually what's going on with their webcam. Their webcam might be connected to their laptop, and it's just a bit of a challenge to move it around. So don't rely on that for the assessment, but rather rely on a good set of pictures and a good set of information that involves assessing their discomfort and where their discomfort is located, their typical work setup, and if there's anything they'd like you to know prior to the session. A biggie here is to connect with your clients. So, you know, don't just get right into it. What you want to do is ask them first, tell me about your work from home situation. Think about that PEOP approach. You know, ask them about what their work environment is like. Think about if there's any other factors that could be contributing to their discomfort that we can address. Thinking about a more holistic approach here. And then knowing, because home is a little unpredictable and does not always promote the best working postures and positions, we need to really focus on the strategies. We need to think about helping people budget more movement into their day, coming up with these flexible working positions, strategize along with the person rather than just giving them a list of equipment and the desired working postures, knowing that it's really not going to be perfect all the time. In your reports, make sure you rank purchase recommendations by priority and include plan Bs. So knowing that there's more than one way to solve an ergonomic issue, make sure you present the person with that choice. And again, if they're working off a stipend or limited on financial resources, make sure that it's very obvious what the top priority is that they need to invest in first, or the habit or the routine that they need to implement right off the bat. And get to know in your recommendations the lower cost, quick ship, easy install, and flexible work devices, the good and the bad. So I've done a lot of purchasing just to explore this idea. And we can't really rely on product reviews a lot of times when it comes to ergonomics. It might be a positive review for the design or, you know, something like that, but it's not, it really takes you as an ergonomic specialist to get to know what's out there and so that you kind of have a wider range of knowledge about product that extends well below the top tier brands, to be honest. Then you want to make sure you measure your outcomes. Make sure that you're obviously providing services that are effective, and leave the door open, because if you want your services to be really effective, you need to leave that door open, whether it's phone calls or emails after the session, making sure that the person is doing well, knowing that things change, it's an unpredictable environment. Be that support for the person that they can go back to if they are increasingly uncomfortable. Think flexibly. This has been maybe the main takeaway, and I thought this was super interesting. So here was, of my advanced assessments, I think this was the group of the 60-something advanced assessments, what were the #1 recommendations that I made? And it was other. And I'm thinking about what falls in this category. And it's things like USB splitters, like the right connection so that they can actually use a mouse and keyboard. External webcams, so they're not, I mean, so many people are using their laptop with their webcam, so they're able to rest a $50 webcam, sit it on top of your monitor, and you've solved a really big ergonomic issue with repetitive neck stress and awkward postures of the neck. And that's not a typical ergonomic recommendation we make. Here's an example of one. This is something I did with one of my consultants up north, and this was a penthouse apartment, small. This was also her guest room. It needed to stay as her guest room, but her main office, and the individual was less than 5 feet tall. She did not want any permanent fixture. We clearly see the dreaded desk drawer there. That was not going to change. So we're thinking, okay, a keyboard tray, not going to work. What are we going to do in this situation? What is the recommendation here? And of course, it's a tempered glass tray table, because it's so stylish. It totally fits with the space. It lowers to her resting elbow level, and I think she did get a new chair as well, so that she can sit comfortably in that space, and a movable tool she can move out when her guests come into town. Again, this is what people are looking for, and you need to think along these lines when you have the very specific barriers of working from home. And here's the good news. What we're doing as ergonomic specialists can still be done in the virtual space. They can be very effective at reducing work-related discomforts. We have seen since the start of the pandemic with the virtual programs a 34% discomfort reduction, which is very much in line with what we want to see in any ergonomics program. So we just want to encourage everybody to go out there and keep doing what they're doing, and helping people who are definitely struggling in the work from home situation by thinking flexibly and looking at the whole picture. A few resources, some of which I mentioned a few times during the talk. And I just want to say thank you. Thank you to everyone who attended this talk today. Thanks to Contour Design. Please feel free to reach out to me to continue this conversation, and I would love to take some questions now. So I'm going to pop out the question box. Give me a quick second here. Great. Just give me a quick second so I can look at the questions. Okay, I see a good question here. From Philip Connolly. Hi, Nikki. How do you personally address the situation when delivering a fully functioning and fit for purpose task chair and you quickly realize the issue the consumer is complaining about has been caused by their desk or table? and not their existing chair. Yeah, this is a big one. My concern here is hopefully not to destroy the original buying process, exactly like the dreaded desk drawer, by being unnecessarily negative, especially when they've just spent a lot of money. So Phil, I have encountered this a lot. And if you're thinking about the same kind of desk I'm thinking about, I think it's the idea of, can we go to some flexible working positions that are better? Can the drawer be removed so that they can sit higher in relation to the desk? If the issue of the desk maybe it's not the desk drawer issue, maybe the desk is just entirely too high, so maybe we can get a taller cylinder chair and a higher footrest so that they can sit more comfortably at that level. And then strategizing some other different work areas where they can work as ergonomic as possible in their position. Now, I do think there is kind of a line we need to be careful about, because if somebody's experiencing an advanced musculoskeletal disorder, we need to obviously take that seriously and make the recommendation that's going to help the person the most. I think when we're dealing more with just fitting somebody to their workspace and giving them advice on an educational basis, we can be a little bit more flexible there. But I think it comes down to offering really good working strategies and positions, even, going back to the idea of, I still think that working on a lap desk with an external mouse and keyboard is better than the alternative of constantly reaching up for your workspace. I hope that answers your question. Chris asked, your data that I present, how many people did I poll? In the typical workforce, it was 109. And there was one graph that I presented that was it was the advanced group. And it was that one discomfort graph on the second page. And that was I believe it was 62. So this is a good question. Where in the world did you find a decent task chair for under $200? The answer is, it's not that decent. And I think I tend to point people in the direction of less is more in that case. If you get a task chair that's adjustable and armrest and C-pan slider and back support and all that, it's not going to have a warranty. It's not going to be made of quality material. So I try and point people away from a traditional adjustable ergonomic task chair in that price point, but rather go for something basic that at minimum has lumbar support and height adjustability. And for a lot of people, again, people working at kitchen tables, that's going to help. It's going to be far better than their current scenario. And a lot of times they're trying to make a patch, their eventual plan to go back to the office one day, and they just need something that will provide relief to them there. So I try and again explain in detail the pros and the cons, and not try and point somebody in the direction of a chair that's under $200 that has a lot of functions, but just try and get to the bare minimum. And again, this is more in the population for people that are not experiencing musculoskeletal disorders. Oh, great. Yeah. So Keith says, recommend adding an Ergotron type device to the desk that has the drawer. So yeah, a drop down keyboard tray. There's a few sit stand desk risers that sit on top of a fixed height desk that will drop down on the keyboard tray. That's a great idea. And they're hard to find. I know Ergotron is one of them. I can think of one other brand. The other thing is that people that own those types of desks, they tend to be so focused on and I'm just kind of generalizing, they tend to be focused on the aesthetics a lot of times. They don't want to bring in something that's quote unquote unsightly to their beautiful desk and their feathery pillow. So that would be the challenge there, is that aesthetics over function. But that is a great advice for somebody who really, in the case that the first question that I answered, somebody where it's a desk issue, they really have a problem that you need to correct. A great idea is a sit stand desk riser that has a keyboard tray that drops down. Yes, so Amy Hayes asked, are we doing virtual chair evals and working with vendors that are doing chair evals? Yeah, so we've done some of this, and I think the most important thing is to have a very close relationship with the chair vendor. And we came up with our assessment form and process by working very closely with the source of the chair, and then also having the employees the option to go in person to do a fitting, and just keeping that virtual fitting for those people who are unable, or it's their preference not to do that. But I think the best advice there is to heavily collaborate with the chair vendor, make sure that your process is really sound. I mean, the challenge there is you need to make sure that the individual is measuring themselves accurately, and that, you know, obviously you want the end result to be a chair that fits them well. And using, you know, if you work with a more limited catalog, say that a employer typically goes to 5 or 6 chairs. Obviously, the more you add to that, the more complicated it gets with choosing the right chair for the individual. And then always emphasizing to the client that it is always best to try before you buy, and be open to returns. If you get a chair and it's not that comfortable, it doesn't feel right for you, just go ahead and return it. It's like a car, you're going to spend a lot of time in it. Oh, somebody pointed out that the last slide here, James's email address is, yeah, contour design is misspelled. So add in that if you're going to reach out to James. Sorry about that, guys. Looking through these questions, we can answer maybe just one more. Okay. Okay, address workman's comp issues when you're working at home and safety cannot be controlled by the main office. In these cases, we heavily recommend an on-site assessment. So you can get I just feel like that is my best judgment. And knowing that the responsibility is still on the employer to provide a workspace that is free of hazard, even in the home environment. So I think with advanced cases, whenever you can, going in person is probably the best bet. Okay. I have some, I'm going to end off with this one from Austin. So the references slide again. I'm going to go back to that. Oops, I can go back. Here you go. You said, have I read Why We Sleep? Somebody just recommended that to me. So thank you for reminding me that. I have not read that, but that was very recently recommended to me. And then which chairs run the flow chart, reach out to me individually and I'll share that with you. And then I would love to share with you the foam desk that the high school student made. I think it's fantastic. I believe it's on our website, but you can email me and I'll send you a template of it. And it's great because you can cut it at different heights. It takes it's a fun project for kids, you know, high school students that age. And we would love it to get some more exposure. Okay, I think I'm going to sign off because I am coming on to a meeting, but I just want to thank you guys for being here today, and I wish you nothing but the best. Take care.